Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about the beginning of the corruption trial of former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan and the back and forth around the advisory question to tax millionaires more in exchange for property tax rebates. I'll then join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop.
Do you care about school spending, classroom curriculums, and transparency policies in education, but find it hard to cut through the partisan noise? The nonprofit Franklin News Foundation is bringing you straight news reporting on education through Chalkboard News. We're talking news without spin. Franklin brings fact-based news that makes sense to everyday parents, teachers, and readers who have skin in the game. By donating to Franklin, you can help American families and communities receive the education-focused news they deserve. Become a supporter today at franklinnews.org/donate.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Here's some of the top stories from the past week. The trial against former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan began this week with jury selection. Jim Talamonte has more.
Madigan is facing 23 counts of bribery, racketeering, and misconduct. State Representative Patrick Windhorst, a law school graduate from Southern Illinois University, said the jury pool had already been whittled down.
From that 1,000 or so that they had sent summonses to, they condensed it down to under 200 who did not have some indication on where they were leaning with the case already.
Windhorst said both sides will be looking for jurors sympathetic to their arguments.
The object of jury selection is to get a fair jury that will consider the evidence and determine the facts of the case to get a just result.
The attention given to Madigan's case makes it different.
You know, when you're dealing with a high-profile defendant, that tends to skew things depending on who you ask, one way or the other.
Judge John Robert Blakey said he would not rush jury selection, but he did suggest that attorneys might economize time after the process began slowly. After that discussion, defense attorneys asked potential jurors about religion, frozen yogurt, and television shows. In Chicago, I'm Jim Talamonte.
The judge in the case said they had aspired to have opening statements beginning Tuesday, but with jury selection continuing, that may not happen until Wednesday. Former Illinois Governor Pat Quinn continues his push for voters to approve a non-binding question on the November 5th ballot to bring about a millionaire surcharge. With early voting ongoing, voters are being asked the advisory question on whether those making more than $1 million should be taxed an additional 3% to pay for a fund for property tax relief.
The unfortunate thing is there's no money in the property tax relief trust fund. It hasn't ever been appropriated any money to give out these annual rebates.
Critics of the proposal say it would harm small and medium-sized businesses. State Representative Marty McLaughlin said it would create business deserts in Illinois.
Yeah, I saw that comment. I don't think we have to worry about deserts for millionaires. I think what we have to worry about is everyday people who can't afford to pay their property tax bill losing their home.
Quinn produced data showing of more than 3 million households, more than 77,000 are millionaires that he said would be able to better pay such a surcharge. Those are the top stories from the past week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, I'll join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss the news. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Do you know what elected officials in Illinois are doing with your tax dollars? Do you want to make sure that your voice is heard? If so, then you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch how your elected officials make decisions, hold them accountable for their actions, and be a more informed citizen. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to get involved in the democratic process and to make a difference in your community. Subscribe today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. We are recording this on Thursday, October 10th. Jury selection is underway in the federal corruption trial of longtime former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan, but it's been slow going in the middle of the third day today. So far, just 3 jurors have been seated. Joining me to discuss this is Greg Bishop, Illinois Associate Editor. Greg, the Center Square Chicago-based reporter, James Talamonte is in court covering the trial. What can you tell us about how it's going?
Yeah, so we're looking at potentially 10 more weeks on top of this week where they're going to be hashing through all the details of what federal prosecutors allege was Madigan Enterprise, a nearly decade-long scheme of Madigan and his associates working to benefit themselves using Madigan's office in exchange for getting favorable legislation across the finish line for Commonwealth Edison. All of this starting, of course, when it was revealed during a deferred prosecution agreement where ComEd essentially agreed that they were involved in this. That was in the summer of 2020, Dan. And then in the summer of 2022, you had Madigan being charged with all of this. And finally, now we've got the case moving forward. But before they even get into their opening arguments for the prosecution and the defense, they've got to select a jury. That's how our system works. You get a jury of your peers to hear all of the evidence, to hear the defense, and then they're the ones that are going to be making the decision as to whether Madigan is guilty or not.
It sounds like from our reporter who's in the courtroom, in the courthouse, James Telemonte, that the defense attorneys, Michael Madigan's defense attorney, and we should note, too, there is a co-defendant, longtime ally of Michael Madigan's, Michael McLean, former lawmaker himself, former lobbyist for ComEd, that the defense attorneys are being extremely, what's the term I want to use? Careful with who they allow to sit on the jury. Of course, there's been tons of pre-trial publicity about it, about this case. Madigan was speaker for all but 2 years, for essentially 38 years. He's well known, and they're worried that some of these juries are coming into, these potential jurors, I should say, are coming into the trial with preconceived biases.
Yeah, and some of the questions are as simple as, what kind of newspapers do you subscribe to and read? And questions about what's your thought on unions? Do you like unions, or are you an opponent of unions? What kinds of TV shows are you watching? Your media consumption? Even people asking questions about what kind of yogurt they enjoy. Not sure the basis of that for a juror questionnaire, but regardless, what you have playing out here, Dan, is this is the legal system in the United States. People who face these types of charges, they have every right to face their accuser and to have a jury, a fair jury, an unbiased jury that's hopefully dispassionate to hear all the evidence and weigh the instructions on what they're supposed to be ruling on, and then to make that decision. But to get there, both sides got to be happy with the jurors. They each, the prosecutors and the defense, get to ask all of these different questions. They get to weed through hundreds of jurors, potential jurors, where they then make the decision. And one thing that I saw also being reported out, of course, Jim's doing an incredible job, and he's in for the long haul to get all the way through this potentially 11-week-long trial in Chicago. Some of the questions were even, about whether or not people wanted to serve on the jury. Some younger individuals who were asked, of course, in this process of selecting a jury, whether they wanted to be on a jury, and people saying, I've never been on a jury. This would be great. This would be interesting to be on a jury. Sometimes, though, that might be a disqualifier. If somebody is adamant to be on a jury, then prosecutor or the defense may say, we kind of want somebody who isn't that, should we say, adamant on serving on a jury, especially this one. But clearly, they're taking their time in finishing up jury selection. Will they get this done, Dan? That's a big question. Before the end of the week. I believe they're off on Monday, but Tuesday, the judge said he aspires to start with opening comments and opening arguments, essentially the real start of the case after the jury is selected. So as slow as it's been going with only 3 jurors selected, keep in mind, going to have a jury of 12 and then some alternates. Are we going to finish up jury selection before the end of the week? I think that's a big unanswered question at this time.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, it's now looking like this trial could last as long as 11 weeks, including this week of jury selection. So you're talking about 10 weeks of testimony and evidence presentations and whatnot. And that's a long time for jurors who may have jobs, etc., may have kids at home, to sit through. And then we don't know yet what the evidence is. We got some examples last year during the ComEd 4 trial when the jury came back with guilty verdicts on all 4 defendants in that case. That case, of course, is tied to this case. But man, that's just a long time for jurors to sit there, be presented evidence, and then at the end have to render a verdict based on some evidence that you heard 2.5 months earlier.
Yeah, I don't envy the task that whoever's going to be on the jury has in front of them, because they are going to have to wade through a ton of information. Also interesting, Dan, I mean, just leading up to this is massively historic. There's no question. Madigan was the longest serving state house speaker, from my understanding, in the country. He had a nexus of power, not just being the speaker who controlled what comes through the House. He was also a chair of the Democratic Party of Illinois. So that nexus of power really gave him the ability to, get the reputation he got as somebody who really had massive control over the House, but also over Illinois politics. So they're going to have to, I'm sure, wade through, phone call conversations, undercover video. They're going to have to deal with what the U.S. Supreme Court handed down in that case, dealing with bribery and determining whether or not this was a gratuity after the fact or if this was a bribe to initiate action. They're going to have to handle all these nearly 24 counts of racketeering and understand the legal concepts of that. It's not a small task they have in front of them. There's no doubt.
No, I agree with you. I don't envy the jurors in this case either. It's a long, tough task. Do thank them though for volunteering their time to do this. As mentioned, listeners can keep up with all of our coverage of the Mike Madigan corruption trial at thecentersquare.com. But let's move on. Greg, former Illinois Governor Pat Quinn is pushing for voters to approve a non-binding question on the November 5th ballot that would assess a, quote, surcharge on millionaires. It's an attempt, he says, to lower property taxes. Many Republicans say it would be a jobs killer. Tell us more.
Yeah, so what you have here is it's just an advisory question. It's non-binding. Whatever the outcome is really isn't going to change anything. But former Illinois Governor Pat Quinn, he's promoting this as something to send the legislature a clear message on what direction taxpayers want to go. Everybody knows Illinois has among the highest property taxes. You look at all kinds of different surveys of the entire country, and Illinois is second behind only New Jersey. So property taxes are a big issue. And it's not really going the opposite direction. People are actually seeing their property taxes increase quite a bit, even though it's well known that Illinois government costs taxpayers a lot in this state. So one of the driving factors for property taxes is school districts. And there's been an effort to try to give more state tax dollars to school districts in a way to try to lower or ease property tax reliance. That really hasn't helped, even though the schools have gotten $2+ billion over the past 7 years or so, extra on top of what they got from years before. But property taxes are still going up. So they did try to enact a progressive income tax in 2020. That would have said that the more money you make, the more percentage of income tax you're going to pay. But that didn't necessarily earmark those dollars for anything. It would have just gone into the general revenue fund for state government to spend it however they wanted to spend it. But this proposal, according to Quinn, would essentially say that the dollars raised from this millionaire surcharge would go into a property tax relief fund, a trust fund, he says is already on the books. There's just no money in it. So no money in this trust fund. He says having a dedicated funding stream from a millionaire surcharge of 3% extra every year could generate $4.5 billion. Now, he also says, Quinn, in supporting this, that this money wouldn't go to the government. He says it would be cut through checks and rebates back to the taxpayers who are paying property taxes. So it's one big distinction that Quinn says he's trying to make with this proposal. Again, it's a non-binding referendum. It's just an advisory question. So you would still have to have another vote on an actual binding constitutional amendment, such as what we had back in 2020 with the progressive income tax. They have to change the Constitution's flat income tax to one with progressive rates. Well, if they're wanting to do this, they're going to have to change the Constitution to do it. But that's not what's on the ballot in November. In November, it's just an advisory question. So while Quinn's promoting this idea of a millionaire surcharge, he says, there's 77,000 plus people in Illinois blessed to be millionaires, he says. They could help provide relief and rebates back to property taxpayers across the state. But other people see, one man's millionaire is another man's job creator, because this could impact small to medium-sized businesses that do more than $1 million in revenue. State Representative Marty McLaughlin, he criticized this entire thing, number one, as being unconstitutional, and number two, creating what he called small and medium-sized business deserts. And he says Illinois does need to address climate change, but it's the business climate that needs to change, McLaughlin said. So clearly this is an issue that's really politically driven, especially during a presidential election where they'll get a large number of voters turning out. And what they plan on doing after that, I guess we're going to see. But there's been a lot of debate about this non-binding question. We'll watch closely to see what the outcome is.
As we said, it's a non-binding referendum, but it will be on the November 5th ballot or earlier if you plan to vote early or mail in your vote. So just advise our listeners to pay attention and make an informed decision on it. Greg, both the Chicago Bears and the Chicago White Sox are lobbying state and the city of Chicago officials to help fund new stadiums for each of them. But yet another study released just last week says that taxpayer-funded stadiums are a bad deal for taxpayers overall. Why is that?
Yeah, the Tax Foundation saying that stadium subsidies regularly fail to generate new tax revenue and jobs or attract new businesses. Really, when you get down to it, it's saying that the taxpayer cost just isn't cutting it. One of the officials from the Tax Foundation, Adam Hoffer, he said that in terms of what a taxpayer gets for that investment, the answer is they get sports teams, but not much else. The economic returns, like your tangible economic activity, there just wasn't much found in the research they did. And they look at a variety of different places. Like, for instance, in Washington, where the Seattle Supersonics have an NBA team, they left town because the city would not give them a new stadium. And then real estate values went up. In some other areas they looked at, the economic impact just wasn't there. But all of this, of course, interesting for Illinois, as you've got the Bears and the White Sox, and even some other teams, maybe not well known, even some female professional sports teams looking to get in on the action here. What that action will be, how much of the taxpayer is going to be on the hook for it, either through subsidies or through using taxpayer funds to back up loans. All of these things are going to come at a cost, but is that cost really going to translate into economic activity that brings more investment, that brings more jobs, that brings more higher quality of life? These things obviously being looked at by the nonpartisan Tax Foundation and saying it just doesn't add up.
Yeah, the Center Square's John Stife actually has been writing about this issue for years in localities across the country. Most of these, particularly when it comes to the NFL franchise and the Major League Baseball franchise, the Bears and the White Sox respectively, these teams are owned by billionaires, and they want taxpayer support. John Stife has written in numerous cities where the same issue that's happening in Chicago is happening elsewhere. And what he's found is that all these economic development numbers that particularly these owners throw out there, that cities and other government agencies throw out there, they're not real. The economic impact essentially just replaces the old impact of the Bears playing at Soldier Field or the White Sox playing, at Comiskey. I know it's not called Comiskey anymore, but it's an interesting debate. Of course, Bears fans want their Bears to stay in Chicago, and the White Sox want their team to stay in Chicago. But there's really no benefit to taxpayers, spending any money, let alone, the billions of dollars on these stadiums. Last word on this before we move on. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, well, and you also, you get the same kind of reporting out there that happens when, a new business comes in and they're cutting the ribbon on a multi-million-dollar investment, and they believe that that's going to generate X number of millions of dollars in economic activity just because of this one new investment that this company's making. Or, for instance, you get, economic impact statements of, say, like a large expo that happens, like a fair, for instance. This fair over the past week generated $50 million of economic activity. Some of these numbers, it seems like they're used to help justify the taxpayer expense on a certain event or a taxpayer subsidy for a certain business. But does it really come out in the wash? Do they really go back and recalculate those numbers and confirm those numbers 5 years, 10 years down the road? We don't really see those reports, Dan. So when the Tax Foundation delves into this, I think it's something that we definitely need to be aware of and take in.
Time for one last story here. Truth in Accounting has released its latest State of the States report, and the news isn't good for Illinois. Illinois received an F grade from the Truth in Accounting, which is a government finance watchdog. Why does Illinois get a failing grade?
Well, I don't know if this is news, Dan, because Illinois has gotten a failing grade from Truth in Accounting for their State of the States fiscal, reports. I think since Truth in Accounting's been putting these out, which has been onwards to like 14 years or so, maybe even longer. But these reports really delve into how taxpayers are impacted by a state's finances. Debt versus revenues. How much long-term pension obligations are unpaid? What about those other post-employment benefits that taxpayers are on the hook for? How much of that's unpaid? So the fiscal State of the States really does go through and evaluates each state's fiscal condition. Some states doing great. Other states, not so much. Illinois regularly at the bottom, getting an F. For a whole host of things, from long-term debt to taxpayer cost for that debt. For Illinois, for instance, we're considered a sinkhole state. All right, the taxpayer burden's around $37,000 per taxpayer for the debt that they have. And that's just state government. That's not even considering, the taxpayer burden on top of a city like, for instance, Chicago. But some states are doing pretty good. There are 5 sunshine states: North Dakota, Alaska, Wyoming, Utah, Tennessee. Truth in Accounting just really, they go through and they put it in simple terms that people need to, understand how government works and the accountability that there is or the lack thereof. Especially when states go to craft their budgets every year. Are they looking back to make sure they're spending within their means? Or are they just increasing spending as Illinois has? So it's really not a surprise that Truth in Accounting, again, has come out with Illinois being among the worst sinkhole states, getting an F.
Greg, I think it's interesting to note, too, that Tennessee, which has a taxpayer surplus, as you mentioned, they don't have an income tax in the state of Tennessee. You can live there, you work, you'll pay federal income taxes, but you won't pay the state of Tennessee any income taxes on your earnings. Anyway, Greg, we are out of time. Thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with all of these stories and more at thecentersquare.com.